Hey, everybody, welcome to the Blacklist, the show where we interview the elite. And today we have a special treat. Right now, on my right hand side, we have Tony UV, founder of VerSprite. And we're going to dive into a lot of things today, especially hacking and a lot of stuff that he's really, really big on. So, Tony, I appreciate you being on the show.
My pleasure, Ulysses. Great to be here.
Thank you, dude. So, for people that don't know you, because I know you pretty well, give yourself a brief introduction, what you do, and kind of like what your company does.
Sure. I'm the founder of VerSprite. VerSprite is a cybersecurity firm out of Atlanta, Georgia. I myself have been in IT, information security, for about 25 plus years.
Yeah.
Cornell graduate. I wrote a book in 2015 on something that I'm really passionate about called application threat modeling, which is within the space of cybersecurity and information security. I run a chapter in Atlanta called OWASP. It's
Okay.
a open web application security project, and I'm the founder of two other companies. One's a cloud security posture management tool called Alter Cloud, and I'm also a owner of a staffing organization that's called VS Staffing that actually
Yep.
got birthed within VerSprite. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, dude, that's crazy. And so, out of all of the, kind of industries that you could have joined, why specifically that one? Is it just something you were always kind of into?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in Cornell, I actually worked at the computer lab, and this was around the time of the dot-com era.
Yeah.
So 4 years there working at a computer lab. I majored in international finance, but I had that bug, right?
Yep.
So when I got out in 1998, I was briefly did a stint in management consulting and then went into information systems engineering. I got an opportunity with Morgan Stanley a long time ago, and then from there, segued into information security.
Yeah. But why kind of dive deeper into information security? Because I do think that is, I definitely don't think it's something that's known, right? Like
Right.
if I was to think of somebody off the top of my head, it's just, wouldn't be able to,
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely.
why that industry?
Well, it's an industry that's always evolving. It's always changing.
Yeah.
You have different types of attacks, different types of issues, and evolving technologies that you have to keep up with. So it always keeps you humble and hungry at the same time.
Yeah.
So for that reason, different from IT, which back then in the dot-com era wasn't evolving as fast. Like in 1998, it was exploding, and there was a lot of things really to take hold in terms of back-end development, front-end development, traditional architectures, and things like that. But cybersecurity, information security, it was trying to find out like who done it,
Right.
trying to understand fraud, trying to understand cybercrime.
Yep.
It's kind of a little bit of playing detective at the same time, leveraging a lot of that technology background in order to be able to dig deeper. Also, being able to influence how applications can become more secure. For me, I found that fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm not assuming it's evolved so much from, when you first started to now.
Yes.
What are the major key differences? And you probably, because it evolves so quickly, I feel like the internet is a fast changing thing.
Right.
You really have to be on your toes to make, to, I think, at least be, part of the discussion, I feel like.
It's gone into hyperdrive. I mean, absolutely. Cybercrime and the threats out there have gone into hyperdrive because of you have now a computer in your hands.
Yep.
Right? And you have applications, and you have different types of information exchanges and attack vectors, and the human aspects, information manipulation. I mean, there's just so many different things that you can cut up and slice up that you have to address in terms of cybersecurity, data security.
Yeah.
But overall, that's what really keeps me, hungry, right? I want to be able to always be a consummate professional, always be a student.
Yep.
And I think that, going back to just simply, being an entrepreneur, that's always exciting. I don't want to feel like I'm at the top.
Yeah.
I want to feel like I'm still growing and challenging myself and the people that are around me. So that's what I'm after.
Yeah. Consistently innovating and stuff like that. Yeah. And how does it look like year per year? Because, we can see it from where it started to where it is now. But you see the micro changes, I think, that happen
Absolutely,
on a day-to-day basis.
Yep.
How do you prepare your team to kind of, because I totally hear you, stay hungry and you want to be innovative and stuff, but put it in a practical way. How does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I mean, just from a macro level,
Yeah.
what we're talking about in terms of threats has changed. We remember, I don't know if you heard of the talk of like viruses and worms back in the
Right,
day. They
yep.
were a lot more prevalent. Now you have things like malware and
Yep.
ransomware, and then you have things like social engineering. So there's human hacking, and there's different reasons to going into
crazy.
hacking.
Yeah.
You have nation states, dipping into this because of interest on behalf of the country and national interest and things like that. So the geopolitical climate that we're at today, right now, is actually very ripe for a lot of different types of cyber warfare, cyber crime, data
Yeah.
espionage, psych ops, right? That is all leaking into the tech space. So, keeping up with it, it's a matter about having really dependable information sources, networks, and contacts.
That's important. Yep.
Also, being able to understand, we have a saying at VerSprite, to be able to emulate the criminal, right? You have to have a kind of a criminal mindset, criminology understanding about why would someone want to abuse a network, a mobile application, an API,
Yeah.
things like that.
No, that's good. So you're not just looking for the vulnerability. You're looking why somebody would want to attack the vulnerability in the first place. Is that right?
Absolutely, because if we're just looking for the vulnerability, then we're just always being reactive.
Yeah.
Right.
Instead of proactive. Yeah. That's
So we have to be very proactive and think like, okay, how would we actually attack, given, physical infrastructure or network service or application and things like that. So it's super important for us to think like a criminal, to be able to evolve some of the attack patterns, stay up to date with how cyber criminals are attacking anything from a crypto wallet, in cold storage, to a mobile application, or a fintech payment application, or a healthcare application. So there's so many different protocols and information formats and frameworks for exchanging data. And then obviously the advent of the cloud many years ago has added some additional complexity of forklifting a lot of traditional IT that was like in a centralized environment.
yeah.
Now it's up in the cloud, within some of these major players that are out there, like Amazon, Google, AWS, Microsoft, right?
Yep.
So an evolving landscape for sure.
Yeah. And so for your ideal avatar, your ideal client, what are they hiring you for? Because I'm pretty sure it's like on retainer and you guys are constantly, what does that look like?
So when I started VerSprite, I wanted to come up with kind of like a dual persona of the company.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like the suit, right, meets the black hat.
Yep.
So someone that is very nefarious in thought, kind of like, just in the weeds, technically understanding protocols, looking at RFC specs, for different frameworks, but at the same time understanding the business impact for a hack, right? So there's a lot of smart people. When I was working for a Fortune 50, right before I started VerSprite, I basically saw that in the marketplace, it was really smart auditors that just understood the rationale for the business to align to a security, let's say, framework,
Yeah.
but they didn't really get down and dirty into hacking and exploitation and understanding some of the psychological aspects of hacking and things like that. On the flip side, you had a lot of great hackers that didn't really do a good job of articulating the business impact and the business rationale of like, okay, fine, you hacked my box, you hacked my my application, like why should I care? You have to be able to kind of walk them through to say, like, beyond the exploit, what does this mean in terms of the information I compromise? Why do I care about this information?
Yeah.
How does this information actually make me money or prevent me from making more money?
Right.
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 Got to connect those dots, and that's really the spirit of what embodies VerSprite.
Okay. And on a month-to-month basis, what does the deliverables look like when you're like, with a client?
Sure.
Is it evolving like how you just kind of mentioned? You're like finding these vulnerabilities, seeing why people would attack them, and all of that information. Is that how it looks like on a?
So, I mean, the roster of what we do, I mean, we have about 30 or 40 SKUs that we can do for clients, but mostly clients are definitely looking for us to break into their physical presence, right? Their physical, corporate presence, or, break into an application. And
So they're hiring you
Yes.
to hack them?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And then now on the flip side, many of the organizations, come to us and they just want to be able to, handle some of the regulations that are after them, right?
Yeah.
If you're in healthcare and fintech, data privacy, I mean, there's, GDPR in Europe has come and really affected a lot of U.S. companies. It's inspired California to have its own privacy law called CCPA. And so regulations are forcing businesses to be able to respond and make sure they have security and privacy right.
Yeah.
So companies come to us for that assistance and help. So it looks a little bit different. Sometimes we are asked to be able to, hack into an application, hack into a mobile app, try to, exemplify how financial fraud could happen,
Yeah.
how sensitive data can be compromised, intellectual property could be compromised. But at the same time, we're also trying to do really interesting things in this M&A world that we're living in. There's a lot of consolidation in the industry.
Yeah.
So companies can come to us and say, hey, we want to kick the tires on this company that we're buying. and they happen to have dev outfits in all parts of the Balkan region. There might be different alliances, for nation states.
Okay.
And so you've got to look and examine the code and see if there's like, any level of abusive patterns that might have been factored into the code or into the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so we work with a lot of global companies on that.
That's so crazy to me. From your team, when you're hired to, because that to me that's very interesting, right?
Mhm.
When you're hired to essentially hack into somebody's system, what is the first thing you guys look for? What's the main vulnerability that most people end up having?
I think the easiest vulnerability to exploit is business logic vulnerabilities because, as you can imagine, there's actually software out there to identify what's wrong with software, right? So let's say that you write a piece of software for a healthcare organization or an insurance company. Well, there's tools out there to help you find out what's vulnerable or what's weak.
Yeah.
But, they're revolving around kind of like some patterns. It's basically pattern recognition. But when you're a hacker, you're just kind of poking around. You're kind of, I kind of make the example of like when you're trying to do, breaking an entry. What do most, physical criminals do? They case the place, right? They scope the place. They look at entrances, exits, and they look at patterns. So understanding how the application works, information flows, some of the privilege model. Oh, I have the ability to do this.
Yeah.
Well, what can I do with this, right? Really the kind of the favorite go-to for the experienced cyber criminal, I would say that you're not going to catch typically with like a tool is manipulating business logic.
And what does that mean?
So you might like, let's take, a cryptocurrency application where you're, building in, writing smart contracts.
Yeah.
And, you're trying to do bridging financial transactions between one platform to the other. A business logic manipulation is maybe how you're, doing the simple math, right? How you're doing the transaction, how you're, you could manipulate, maybe how the overall transaction math is being done. A classic case that was always exemplified of business logic manipulation was back in the 90s .com era where e-commerce just blew up, was the abuse of coupon codes, right? Oftentimes, like a retailer would have a coupon code and they would, have a very poor way of dynamically creating, EC257 or something. And there was a way that you could just enumerate or guess, right? So they didn't really think about how maybe a criminal would just try to, guess additional coupon codes and try it like a zillion times. And you can easily programmatically write a routine to do that for you. So that's where financial fraud could come in. And it's back then it was a lot harder to detect. Obviously today that's something like that. It's very trivial.
Yeah.
But, it's about, using the logic of how the application was designed almost against itself.
Yeah. That is so insane. How do you make sure you vet your team? Because what I'm thinking is that's a lot of power to give to somebody, right? Where
Mhm.
people know exactly to find exits, entries to, kind of manipulate the system or, use it against itself.
Right.
How do you make sure that, your team is, ethical under, because that's a lot of power.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be high integrity, right? And you got to make sure that that they're all behind the mission.
Yeah.
And the mission of VerSprite, VerSprite stands for True Spirit. It's meant to be like true spirited cybersecurity consulting, not cookie cutter. So we're passionate about breaking into things, exemplifying how security flaws actually cost businesses a lot of money.
Yeah.
So the first step is to really find individuals that can espouse that mission. If they're not about it, then they're not for us,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a lot of the space of cybersecurity consulting is kind of clouded, and
Right,
there's
right.
a lot in that space. Some of them want to get into it, just to make money,
That's true. Yeah.
But really, it's beyond just simply looking at things like their ability to be able to show that they can program or that they can think on their own. It's very much a psychological and a network based reference. Well, we might want to understand more about the person, right? To understand what is their pyramid of priorities in life.
Yep.
If we see that they have a passion to learn, to break into things, to kind of define and discover and to share that knowledge, right? When you're passionate about something, you want to share it. So we look for that. And that is a VerSprite, employee. Someone
Got
that's
it.
super passionate, but also has high integrity. And you can kind of tell, high integrity related actions by how they conduct themselves in meetings, timeliness, professionalism, the way that they analyze, the way that they treat the customers, the way that they try to understand, right, the business rationale for how the product exists,
Yeah.
and then relate their analysis of the security model that might be insecure and relate it back to what the client cares about.
Yeah.
Because if I'm only going to tell you what I care about as a hacker, then that's kind of egotistical, right?
Yeah.
I'm just kind of showing off. But if I'm trying to speak in the context of like, well, I want to say this in the context of how it's preventing you from making more money, right?
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah, what I'm noticing in this interview is your business is very technical, but the way you do business is very psychological. So the technical things, yes, they matter, but the way that you do them, the way that you kind of get into the criminal mind, the way that you do all that type of stuff is very psychological. You're looking at human behavior, and you do the same thing when you're trying to catch criminals, when you're trying to attract talent. Is that true? Because
Absolutely.
you're also seeing their physical interactions, how they are as a human being, because that's going to ultimately determine if they're, somebody that's ethical or not.
Right.
So that to me is shocking because, again, in a very technical space, you are a psychologist major almost, It's crazy. So that's good. Good to hear. And another thing that I wanted to talk about. So most people, I think, when they're listening to this interview, they're probably not going to know. A lot of this stuff might go over their head, right? Because they're just not in this space directly. But I think what's going to stand out to them is the fact that they need something like this. I think this gets overlooked because to give you an example, I think when a lot of business owners start out, they forget that they have to do taxes or they don't do it correctly. And then they figure out like, oh shit, that's going to bite me in the ass.
Right.
I think this is something similar, right? Where they don't think they necessarily need it. When do companies realize this is an issue?
Well, I think, first off, people looking at this, has to understand that cybersecurity isn't really just a niche and for someone else to handle, whether they're, representing a company or just simply paying the bills online, to a bank. Cybersecurity affects their daily life, and their lives literally could be ruined, right? Their reputation could be ruined. There's, doxing types of attacks, which are meant to undermine the credibility of a celebrity or a politician, perpetration, defamation. There's all this different types of things that affect different types of individuals, but even if you're just simply, an average Joe or Jane and you're paying your bills, right, you still have credentials that have access to your bank account. You still, you could be duped into putting your credit card down, or maybe even opening up your cold wallet, right, to a nefarious hacker. So there's a lot of different, threat campaigns that are happening out there, and the point is that cybersecurity affects everybody. So let me just say one thing that's super important. It's that the hot currency today isn't the dollar, isn't Bitcoin, isn't Ethereum. It's your information.
Yep.
That's the hottest currency right now, and companies today, governments today are monetizing your information, my information. They're monetizing it, right? Digital advertising, the more that they know about you, the more speared advertising they can do. In terms of criminal intent or government, services even, obviously there's some concern about how much does the government know about my whereabouts, my health data, what I do in my personal life, my likes, dislikes, my associations, my views politically, right?
Yep.
So our data is really the object of the cyber warfare. And we sometimes think in our minds, well, the hacker is the person with the hoodie, in some sort of like nefarious underground, broken down building, just breaking into accounts and things like that. But our information is under attack by even corporations that we entrust it to. If you think about a lot of the breaches that have happened with major organizations, some of them Fortune 50 organizations, they get hit with a $50 million fine. That's like 0.05% of their earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, right?
Yeah.
It's like nothing.
Yeah.
So they're just going to basically just like shrug it off. So it's important to be able to take a little bit more of, personal pride and responsibility for your digital footprint. If you're a teenager or young adult, highly recommend maybe coming up with, puppet accounts right out there. Understand where you need to put out real information of yourself and where do you need to create like puppet accounts so that you can get the services that you need without compromising a lot of who you are and your persona.
Yeah.
The longer that you can navigate, with some level of anonymity, then the better it will be overall for you to preserve the information that is largely going to use for your own reputation and potentially your own wealth.
Yeah.
So it's super important. It hits everybody.
Two things that you said that I really wanted to cover. So you said, companies get hit with a fine, right? Like the company themselves are liable if their information is leaked. Is that correct?
Yep.
So, although for big corporations, that's like a slap on the wrist to them, for other people, it can be very detrimental, right? So how would a small business owner, let's say anywhere from 10 to 50 employees, how would they best protect themselves from liabilities like that?
Yeah, I think it comes with some simple security hygiene. The thing that is the gateway to any access, from our phones to our, cloud data storage, our email accounts is passwords. Passwords are evil,
Yeah.
right? You got to remember them, and typically they're not constructed. So having a good mechanism and method to safeguard passwords, manage those passwords, ensuring multi-factor authentication, not using text messages as an extra level of authentication, although a lot of banks
Really?
still today use that, but using instead like a multi-factor authentication like Google Authenticator
Yep.
or Microsoft Authenticator, Authy, and things like that. But that's just the beginning. That's just the baby steps.
Because can't people still? I mean, I think SIM swapping right now is something
Yes.
that's pretty. I wouldn't say a trend, but it's happened to a lot of people that I know
Right.
where they'll SIM swap and they'll get access to literally everything because
Right.
the passwords that they do have access to, they're sending the two-factor authentication to their phone,
Right.
and then it's like over for them. So so you're saying switch off of that and go to something like Authy where it's basically is that like cloud-based, or how does that work?
Yeah, these MFA or multi-factor authentications are basically providing what's called a token. So dynamically, they're creating a new token like every couple of seconds.
Right.
And you put it in as a second form of authentication to your provider. It could be your email provider. It could be your, internet provider if you're trying to look at Paramount or HBO or whatever, right? A lot of these online forums, Netflix or whatever, they might have a multi-factor authentication option that either you have to enable.
Yep.
So you have to go in and enable that. And this just prevents, you having peace of mind, right?
Yeah.
That your stuff is your stuff.
Yeah.
So that's super important. But, you also have to, the other key recommendation, if I were just to make two, so I talked about authentication and multi-factor authentication, but is context, right? To be able to, if I, call you a week after this and I say, hey, Ulysses, great chatting up with you in Vegas. But I mentioned something that's kind of off, right? I mentioned something that's like, hey, you were going to send me that authorization form for, me being able to, contribute, make a donation to your, to whatever cause, through, cryptocurrency exchange. Context is about, like, as a human to be able to say, wait, does this jive with something that actually really happened? Like, is this really Tony? So when we
Yeah.
get emails or when we get like a Slack message or a chat message or even an SMS, we have to be able to use context. Right now, there's a lot of campaigns out on SMS that says, hey, long time no speak, and it's coming from a number that maybe that's not on your contact list, right? But because as humans, we're so designed for like, well, I recently did get a new phone, and this could be that long lost friend that I forgot about. Let me just go ahead and respond. It's like, wait, who is this, right? And when you're doing social engineering, you basically are looking for that hook. Once you
Yeah.
get that thread of the back and forth, and you establish some level of credibility because maybe they have background information on you,
Right.
then they're hooking you into a rapport. And once they have the rapport, they'll build from there. And it could be a long play or it could be a short play.
Yeah, because I've recognized that where with like phishing emails or like SMS text messages, or when a friend will send you a link and you're like, is this you, or something like that, right? And a lot of people fall for it.
Yeah.
A lot of people fall for it.
Right.
And I'm like, to me, I don't know, maybe I'm not in this space, but I feel like that's just kind of common sense. Like, a buddy that I haven't spoken to is not going to send me a link and say, is this you? Like that totally looks like a spam. Right, the phishing email didn't even come from the correct email address.
Right. Yeah.
Right, where yes, everything looks like it came from PayPal, but it's not. It's not at PayPal.com. It's like something else. It's like I don't know. Do people not do the due diligence? Are they not thinking about it? It's just like I think the people think the world is so clean. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, nowadays these reach outs are becoming a lot more tactical. And I mean, there's so many different apps that you can, now with, the ability to fake the likeness of someone's voice and
Right.
their
Deepfakes.
image,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So, deepfakes started out in the movie industry, the entertainment industry, and it's that technology is being used to do impersonation.
Yeah.
And so, the context is really the only saving grace there, where it's like, someone might look like someone you trust. And on top of that, here's the other thing. Cyber criminals are definitely looking at your Instagram, your IG, your Twitter, everything about you that's online in order to be able to understand who you are, right? So they can make advances and campaigns against you that are very, very targeted. So if they want to impersonate somebody and they want to introduce contextual pieces of a story that actually relates to something that you've been, said, or did,
Yeah.
then that context, detection system is basically going to get maybe thrown off. So it's important to realize that in this day and age, that it's so many easy ways to do impersonate somebody, and to be able to, especially when it comes to like high profile types of transactions, like, paying a vendor, like oftentimes corporate fraud, they try to perpetrate the CFO at organizations, and they talk to a controller or an accountant and says, hey, I need to pay this vendor by the end of the week before we close our books. So 50,000 out the door. Here's the ABA information, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Go ahead and wire the money. That happens all the time. Tax season, like you mentioned before, around March, April, there's a lot of impersonation of the IRS, impersonation of your accounting firms, this, that, and the other.
So smart.
So, and then, the holidays are coming up too.
Yeah.
And then also, what's a sad one is when there is a travesty, like there's, we talked, when you look at the things going on in the Ukraine, right? There's a lot of nonprofits and philanthropic organizations that are trying to do something good. And then there's cyber criminals that are trying to perpetrate that cause and say, hey, you know what? Maybe you tweeted about your desire to help out, right? Maybe your focus is on widows or orphans, in the Ukraine or whatever. Then someone can pick that up and scrape up a page, come up and with a seemingly story, even like fake a video, like propaganda video, in order to bait you. And then next thing you know, you're writing an altruistic check for 5Gs.
I've seen that happen to people.
So, I mean, cybersecurity really affects everybody. It's not just a business problem. At the end of the day, the governor of our own information is you and I, right? Everybody that's listening to this, you got to be able to make sure and understand, what information you're putting down, and do you really need to put that down? Let me just talk about an example. I went down to Mexico, and I was with the fam, and I was kind of leaving the country, right? And so obviously, TSA border control, that's legit. You got to show the passport, but then there was a separate agency that was there. It's like, well, we need for you to put in this information. And everyone was like writing down their information on the card, passport information or whatever. And I was
That was me. I did that shit too.
and they're going through the line and they're putting this information down. But I looked at who they were giving the information to, and they weren't really scrutinizing it, doing any sort of validation. So I was like, why do I need to put in my real stuff? And especially the information for my kids.
Yeah.
So I was like, forget that. So, again, you have to make the decision of like what information you're going to give up and what benefit is it giving you or a social service, right? That's going to, help others. Obviously with border control, that's for, border security, making sure that, criminals are going over. So we want to make sure that everyone's given their information. But when it comes to something that's right before that, and there is no logical need, I think the excuse was for COVID related reasons.
Yeah.
But we have to be always to make that question. What information do we want to give up of our children, of ourselves, of our family members, because it could be leveraged in the wrong way.
Yeah. One thing that you mentioned that I want to make sure like we don't miss is you said something along the lines of creating public accounts and to make sure to kind of be a little bit anonymous and stuff like that. How does that work when somebody is trying to develop a personal brand?
Yeah, it's
and
tough.
yeah, because I just feel like it's hard, right? Like you want to be known, but at the same time you're also making yourself a target. So do you think there's a balance, or what can personal brands do to? I mean, I think you touched on it a little bit, but
Yeah, I think there's things that you could do. I mean, there's definitely extremes. I mean, so if you're already having a social footprint out there and you want to be able to have, a level of following in order to promote your business, You just need to be able to, separate, right, the things that are about you so that they're not related to the things that you really care about, like your bank information, your cold wallet, your hard wallet, your, tax information or whatever, sensitive information, things like that. So an example, would be, especially when you're forming businesses, there's different levels of business registration, entity types that can help to protect some level of anonymity. Even if you register a website, right, you can have some level of anonymity in terms of who owns the website, right? Wherever you can, embrace some level of anonymity. Now, if it's going to work against you in terms of promoting yourself and your brand and your business, then, there's even, I thought about for, I think, a millisecond, because I'm not a big fan of TikTok. And not just because I'm old, but, it's obviously taking off and there's a lot of followers, but, understand the origins of TikTok, understands the company that owns TikTok, and then the country that is, obviously housing TikTok as an entity.
Yeah.
There is, again, this goes back to monetization. There's nation states and companies that want to monetize you. And let's define that for a second. What is you? Well, you is, your first name, last name, sure. Address, phone number. Okay, that's basic.
Yep.
But it's also how you look. It's also whether or not if you have a liver spot on your forehead, or if basically you like, fish tacos, or, whatever. Your persona record, the more complete it is, the more attractive it is. Right? It's more attractive for hackers, for business, because it helps to either perpetrate, it helps to either to market to you directly, it also helps to impersonate. So even your voice, if I record your voice, and there's a lot of cyber criminals that are doing this today. They're trying to record. I remember even before deepfakes were coming about, one of the things that we would do when we would do social engineering against an organization would be to call the voicemails, back when you didn't have as much, everyone's on their cell phone, but you had like, PBX switches, corporate, phone systems, whatever. Yeah. And you would call and you would listen to the voicemail, and I would record their likeness, right, of their voice. And so when I would call someone else to go and perpetrate the person I just listened to, I would practice a lot, right, of how to do the intonation. So I might do a Bostonian accent, or I might do a New York accent, or I might do a Southern drawl accent.
That's so great.
Right? So, and this is before now the technology is that you just simply have to introduce a recording into the software, and then you can provide a script so that the script will actually go ahead and speak in the likeness of that recorded binary voice. So a lot of cool and scary things, but this is, we think nefariously so that we can emulate criminal intent. And then we do these exercises against various types of healthcare, financial, government, retail, transportation, manufacturing organizations worldwide. We have about 400 clients worldwide. Yeah, where we've been doing this for about 15 years. So, it's not plateauing either. I mean, the evolving landscape of attacks and technology just makes it so much more interesting. It's like a new dawn.
Yeah. Have you ever had a rogue client?
A rogue?
Or, sorry, not client. Rogue employee?
No, knock on wood, I haven't. So, all
right, good.
Is wood. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know you have a book coming out, right?
Yes. Well, it's a second edition of an existing book, but yes.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about that, because I'm very intrigued. Now, having this conversation, I'm like, wow, like your job must be like, it's always evolving, and it must be exciting in a way. Mm-hmm. But I am pretty sure you guys deal with a lot of threats, on a day-to-day basis as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hackers know that consulting firms are getting in bed with very large organizations. And even, not too long ago when it was in the news that North Korea was reaching out to security researchers. Security researchers are those that word research in the cybersecurity community is kind of like very used kind of sporadically. But a true cybersecurity researcher think of them as like a mad scientist, inventing like the COVID-19 strain, okay, the actual strain that has no cure. That's what a real cybersecurity researcher does. They're finding an exploit that has no cure. There's no patch for it. Yeah. And so interested entities that want to buy that is a nation state, right? Pakistan, North Korea, United States, Russia, et cetera. So when it comes to like, that, that type of market, and, years ago when North Korea actually reached out privately to one of our researchers on staff. and trying to
That's
solicit
crazy.
exploits. And the payouts are enormous. Like if I tell you that one exploit might fetch anywhere from like $500,000 to $2 million, and some of these exploits are, there was a no click exploit from a group out of Israel that basically allowed you to send a text message to somebody and automatically hack their phone without even them having to click it, right?
What?
So these are the types of like 0-day exploits that is highly attractive for nation states. But as a consulting firm, absolutely. I mean, we take a lot of preventive care to make sure that there's a philosophy in cybersecurity called need to know, right? We have different groups, and if they don't need to know information, they don't know about it, right? And we make sure that it's a very much need to know type of environment, and everyone gets and respects that. So technologically, like even if they were wanting to find out this, that, or the other with another group, or we take, we definitely espouse that sort of philosophy very much. But yeah, consulting firms out there are no stranger to advances from solicitations from outside firms.
Yeah.
So masquerading as like a staffing agency, from the Baltic region, or even an interested customer and things like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before I get into the book, I want to ask you one more question. What's probably the hardest vulnerability that you've had to solve or have your entire team on, or you know?
I think the hardest vulnerability that we've had to do was for a very popular software company in the Bay Area, where they had what's called a preloader. Basically, when you boot up your cell phone, there's a couple of things that are happening before the OS is actually being fired up, and we did find some things related to that, but it's when the code base is so small, and there's a lot of things related to the operating system of a mobile device that is pretty restrictive. That was pretty difficult, but very challenging and interesting. But outside of that, honestly, and I guess unfortunately for a lot of companies and consumers out there, we're pretty successful. I mean, our social engineering rates are like close to 100%.
Yeah.
There's some aspects where we're getting in and creating credentials on our own and stealing large volumes of information, exemplifying the theft, right? And so at the end of the day, companies really appreciate that. And they fix it, and that makes us feel better because that could be the information to our family members, neighbors, et cetera,
Yeah.
right? So in that aspect, it's very gratifying. But the sad reality is that that security is not a persistent state, because there's going to be a new update to that code.
Yeah.
And then you have new turnover in software development. What happens if you add developers that are pretty reckless in terms of writing insecure code? Then they're going to basically regress that software application and to make it vulnerable again. So this is why it's not just simply a one and done. It's a reoccurring security hygiene exercise where companies that really, really, really care about data security, data privacy, overall product assurance of what they're offering, they're going to do this on a periodic basis.
Yeah. Damn. Well, great insights. So talk to me about your book. You said it's the second version to the original, right?
Yes.
And what is it about?
So I co-authored this book with Marco Morana. Shout out to him. He's an Italian guy that was living in London. We came up with this methodology in 2010 called PASTA,
Yep.
Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis. And it sounds all fancy, but it's really a risk-centric approach to modeling threats. So what that means is, like, you could think about, threats to a business. Like, you go back to that small business entrepreneur that you asked me, a while back. You could go back to that individual, and they want to know, what are the threats that I need to know about right now?
Yep.
Because it might be different when I blow up and now I have like 1,000 employees underneath my belt. So we have, as individuals, an individual threat model. As companies, we have a corporate threat model or organizational threat model, and the applications have a threat model. So what we invented was a risk-centric approach to threat modeling. We studied a lot of how threat modeling was done in the military with ballistic threat modeling, and we took an approach that says, what are the things that I really are non-negotiables? If I'm writing an application, building an application, what are my non-negotiables that I have to have in terms of security before I roll this thing out the door?
Yeah.
So the book is a beast. It's like a 700-page Bible, but it really talked about threat modeling in general, and then it dove into our methodology called PASTA, which is a risk-centric approach.
Yeah, no, that's good. And so you're saying that that book is mainly for the entrepreneur that has, maybe not as much employees, right? Where they don't have like 1,000 employees, and they can start reading that, utilizing that to start, ASAP, basically.
Well, I mean, that book is really for everybody. It's for the student wanting to get into cybersecurity. There's a lot of people out there that are looking at this. It's like, I want to jump in. I want to jump in and get to cybersecurity because I want to play detective. I want to do forensic analysis. I want to do malware analysis. I want to do reverse engineering and all these other things that might not mean a lot of things to people listening. But it's basically, like I said, building a model of threats. And what's interesting, kind of making an example of individual versus corporate security in the way, my whole background, I'm first generation American. My whole family is from Peru.
Yeah.
And in the 80s, there was this terrorist group called the Shining Path. And the Shining Path was a cartel. And they wreaked havoc in the streets of Lima a lot. And there was kidnappings, there was car bombs, all this type of stuff happening. Many people listening to this around the world might be living in a pretty hostile environment. So when they go out, they innately think, okay, what are the threats that I have to be worried about? Do I have to be worried about kidnapping today?
Right.
Probably on the Strip, thankfully, a lot of people aren't having to worry about that.
Yeah.
But there's other types of scams that are going out there on the Strip, I'm sure.
Oh, 100%.
So you got to be able to understand what is the threat model for you. Now, here's the unfortunate truth about corporate entities trying to secure their applications or products. You know what they're doing? They're doing what I call keeping up with the Joneses security. What that means is that they're looking across to see, well, if I'm, let's say, Wendy's, what is Burger King doing? Or what is my industry doing? And so they look at frameworks. They look at regulatory drivers that tell them this is what you need to do for security. And those leaders, they do that. But they don't introspectively look and say, let me understand my business first.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're, another example I use is if you're John Cena, right? And you're walking out into, let's say, a kind of a hostile street, but everyone just happens to be 4'5", and they basically have, they want to beat you down they want to try to rob your money, but they're going to do that with paper cuts. John Cena is probably not going to feel so threatened, right? So, but if you're, someone maybe that you're going through a rough patch of a neighborhood and they have knives and firearms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you're unprepared, then you got to understand, well, what am I carrying? Am I carrying something of value? We do this almost innately if we go to, international travel, to, Africa or to the Middle East or to Europe, wherever, right? So we don't somehow do this. It doesn't really translate to corporations. And that's exactly why Marco and I developed this methodology called PASTA, because we want to think like an attacker, right? Process for attack simulation.
Yeah.
So it's been really valuable. There's a lot of universities that reference it: MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon. Microsoft's GitLab actually just adopted it as their de facto threat modeling approach for their developers, which is really cool. So, and the book itself, the prelude for the original one, it was endorsed by the cybersecurity czar of the White House under the Obama administration, the late Howard Schmidt.
Nice.
So,
when is this new book being released?
New one's going to be out in July, July of next year. Going back to Wiley Life Sciences in New York, they're the publisher.
Yep.
So they did the first edition. They've been super supportive, and we're making the second one to be a lot less of a beast. That's like a 350 page short read. And but in any case, it's going to have a lot more newer tidbits of how to apply threat modeling and more newer examples and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to information security, it's not something you should skimp out on, So if somebody's not willing to read 700 pages at 350 pages, then it's you're kind of asking for it unless you hire somebody to help you out, right? So,
right.
Because it's not something like branding where, you can miss out on a couple of stuff.
Yeah.
I definitely think this is a lot more important.
Yeah.
How does it affect your personal life? Because I feel like, from this conversation, a lot of it is you're solving a lot of threats and potential threats and, preventing threats. And it's almost as if you're at war all the time. Does it affect your personal life?
That's a great question. In cybersecurity, it's kind of a dark industry. Every time I interview individuals that are even in sales, marketing, some of the more, happy-go-lucky, type of roles. This is very much a dark industry. Don't get fooled by the suit. There's it's tough because you're talking about like nefarious circles, nefarious thought thinking. A lot of cyber criminals are obviously trying to do actions that are related to organized crime. As it relates to human trafficking, as it relates to financial fraud. There's pretty some dark circles there. So in the industry of cybersecurity, there's a lot of problems with mental health. There's also problems with a lot of substance abuse because it can be a very lonely, dark art, right? You're always having to play detective. Also you're trying, if you're a hacker, you're kind of battling the application.
Right.
And you're persistent, and it can be very frustrating. And that's all you do. So like you kind of like that's your world, right? And you separate yourself.
Yeah.
If you're a detective, like a forensic examiner, then you feel compelled to always try to find evidence, try to understand how a particular piece of malware got in, who was the threat actor that put it into my network. Where did they come from? What did they steal? Are they still here? Right? I mean, there's so many things. And then you have these leaders of organizations called CISOs, corporate, chief information security officers, and they don't sleep too well,
Yeah.
So, but me personally, I actually sleep pretty good.
Yeah.
I sleep pretty good, but that's for, I have, definitely some key personal health habits that kind of help me to be healthy and grounded, so I can just I do a lot of things that are useful so that I can get back into the ring and get abused.
Yeah. Makes sense. What happens after you find someone? You find the threat and you find the hacker. Does it go straight to the police? How does that look like?
Interesting, you asked that question because recently, I don't know if you saw, but there was a case with the former CISO at Uber, Joe Sullivan, who was kind of being indicted for charges on misrepresentation of a hack that affected the Uber organization, right? The card ride sharing app. And so, the issue around it was that there was a hack,
Yeah.
and it wasn't reported, right? So, there was some questionable actions that were done, but in general, yes. Like if you are the leader of an organization and you're responsible for information security, you're basically an information steward. You feel like responsible for all the millions of people that are giving you their information so that you can monetize it, right?
Right.
Because without that, you don't have a platform. So, there is that level of accountability. And so, but typically when there is an incident, there is a hack, you work with local law enforcement, you might work with the Secret Service, you might work with State Bureau of Investigations, you might definitely work with the FBI. There's also different types of threat intel sharing groups per industry. Every industry has one. There's one for IT, there's one for finance. There is different organizations that are looking at, financial crimes. It's important when you're running security for an organization to have those relationships. Now, if you're a small entrepreneur, there's no way you're going to be able to, do all these things. That's why you have to rely on someone to run quarterback for you and your overall security posture. We literally meet with, tech startups that are like, okay, here's my security and regulatory concerns. Please take it, and please make sure that I'm not on the news. Please.
Yeah.
Keep us accountable and, do the right thing for us. So that's one of the things that we do at VerSprite.
Yeah. I'm assuming that when you find somebody and you said it very, clearly where you're like, are they still here? I'm pretty sure they see the same thing, right? They see that they're getting shut out.
Mm-hmm. Who sees the same thing? What do you mean?
Like the hacker.
Yeah.
Because obviously when you guys are hired, you guys go in, you find the threat. And then you're like, okay, you start asking yourself these questions. And one of them is like, okay, well, are they still here? Are they still hacking, the company and things like that? Are they also noticing that they're being shut out?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And then, I don't know. I don't know what happens after that. Is it just like, your team against them, or like, how does that end up working out? Like, who ends up becoming the victor, I guess?
So it's a lot of it's very similar to traditional crime. So you have really good, let's say B&E artists that are breaking in, grand theft, artists that are stealing like Tiffany jewelers or whatever. And they have sophisticated tools. They have sophisticated attack patterns. And then there's copycats, right? There's a lot of thieves out there that are just copying what works for someone else.
Yeah.
And so in cybercrime, cyber criminals definitely, there's definitely some innovative, individual lone wolves that are super smart, that they don't want the risk of someone ratting them out. So they kind of operate on their own, or they're kind of like a hacker for hire.
Yeah.
And then you have nation states. Now if you have a nation state that's after you, they're going to put any type of resources on you really quick. And then you have like hacker syndicates that are, hacker groups for hire. So, if they get in, typically I would say an intermediate to advanced hacker, they always want persistence. So even though you might kick them out, they might leave some remnants of code or software that gets triggered by an event. Maybe it's time-based trigger that on a certain day, boom, it fires up.
Yep.
Right. And so it's laying dormant until a certain action within the network or the application, or even just time-based. But persistence, right? And, speaking about a threat model that affects everybody, that's persistence. Just like you see, like, real estate squatting, in different parts of the world.
What is that? Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah. So you have the same thing with hackers. They're not going to go to Amazon and be like, hey, you know what? I want to set up an account with you guys. No, they're just going to hack your existing accounts and then set up shop there. And they're going to do a lot of different things, like, send out phishing campaigns from there. They're going to mine crypto. They're going to, just collect information about your business and sell it to other hackers, right? So there's persistence is super valuable, and you can leverage that threat objective. But overall, criminals want to do what criminals want to do, and that's to get away with crime.
Yeah, crazy. So what does the next 5 years look like for you?
The next 5 years is really just staying abreast of all the different changes and nuances. I think, what's really exciting and some of the things that we've been working on with is around EV vehicle market, a lot of the cybersecurity issues related to EV charging, the overall EV chargers with their interaction with the EV vehicle, cars. There's also, futuristic integrations with, commerce plays or e-commerce plays, entertainment, right? So, when you go and you're in your vehicle, it's an office, it's an experience, right? And all of that experiences requires content and interfaces and data. So I think there's going to be just an evolution of autonomous, flying, autonomous, obviously driving, autonomous transportations, autonomous checkouts, right? For point of sale systems. Overall, what's next in the next 5 years is simply trying to stay ahead and think proactively as a nefarious, hacking agency to be able to help our clients, stay ahead and be proactive versus reactive.
Yeah. Well, dude, you crushed this interview. Where can people find you?
So I'm on Twitter. I'm at T0NYUV on Twitter. You can follow me there. I'm also on LinkedIn. I go by Tony UV. Yeah, so those are the two main areas. If you want to check out my book, you can just simply Google Pasta Threat Modeling. I got a lot of different videos on that. I actually have a metaphorical video out there for those that want kind of just to understand what is this really about. I kind of compare doing threat modeling with actually making pasta. So it's pretty entertaining. Check it out. It's on YouTube.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, dude.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Ulysses. Take care.